Highbridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Quotients by Tracy O'Neill, read by Shaun Grindell. Prologue. He'd found a small way to resolve the future. The year he believed that, though in fact the belief would not last the year, was 2005. It was a various year, one he trusted those who euphemistically might be called his cohort and then didn't, where he quit assuming a fake resume, and an ardor for details could occlude misfortune's gaze. He decided to keep stories to the rooms where they'd happened, but he also aspired to sensible collations of evidence, although, or in particular because, it was a time of perfect aberration. It was when he met Alexandra Chen. In his mind there was a procedure to calm successions. It began with the call center. There you could rely on emergencies. And so, the night before the year talked, Jeremy Jordan turned on his headset. A red light and a grid lit. He asked how he could help, not in the manner of hopelessness. "My life's action is gravity," callers said in their own ways. "Help me catch what's falling. What's falling is me." His training was follow the slope of a suffering mind before it inflicts itself on the body, but listen too for what fills the air one cannot see. A source quivers energy off it, persuades the air around it to shake. Sound huddles waves into intimacy. That is the way of a voice or explosion. Telephones. He could hear that summer in London a woman lay silverware in drawers, knives slapping knives, matching. Signals. They were everywhere if you knew how to heed them. There was some static, a rustle. The woman there and yet closer, in his ear at the center, and her house. Kilometers reduced, as she recalled her husband slamming a door hard enough, her mirror shattered. He slammed it so hard, she said, the image of his departure rained down in shards. From the caller's unseen room, he heard reflections, noise returning. The word, its thrown and it strikes off the surface, arrives in homecoming a little different. Sometimes the waves ripple out. Other times they die. It is water where the word travels clear. No man's land. Sometimes, she said, she wished it were too late for her. He dispatched a mobile crisis unit. He aspired to totem comfort. He told her, "You are not alone," meaning only any more than anyone else. Jeremy's head was heavy with the hour of night, and still to come was his putative real job at the fund. But he would remain on the line until the team arrived for her. And though his voice was reasonable, though his collar was crisp, this was talisman in action, superstitious math. Offer safety, so what life exacted from him would not be Alexandra. He listened to the stranger survive. He said, "Stay with me." Part 1. Dividend. It is dark 1 inch ahead of you. Japanese proverb. Chapter 1. Alexandra Chen saw that they looked at her in search, that unplaceable face. All her life people had wanted to fix her features on a map, but they couldn't. It made people clamp down on her with their eyes. They would coast a room and gaze, then halt. They were trying to figure her out. She had on a flat grey suit and spoke in her client voice, contained and reassuring. The front of a room did not come naturally to her, but she'd practiced how to land her eyes on a small audience and let her voice settle. She had practiced how to sell a country on her selling their country. She'd done it in Uganda and Sweden, had successes enunciating small former Soviet states still in spin-out from the Cold War. Her clients wanted investors from abroad or tourists to unravage images, firm up legitimacy, proper trade deals. That's where they'd arrived in history. There's the Lisbon strategy on one hand, and then globalization means chunks of cartography are left behind. They did not want to be left behind. The boardroom had no windows. There was the woman at the head of the table who had called the firm first. There was a man with pink hands like overstuffed sandwiches. These were individuals with government posts, commercial interests, ties to the embassy. They had clean, cropped haircuts and trim shirts, professionally empty faces. But her brother had taught her poker, had taught her, in bets, you find out who the dreamers are at the table. And she was in the business of dreamers. She was in the business of casting bets on national narratives, then waiting for them to gain ballast. And can it all happen by the game? Someone leaning over the oblong of the conference table said. She was at the whim of FIFA. When she'd practiced her pitch with Jeremy, he'd said he'd trust her with a country. He'd trust her with anything. But her firm, Orbit, had been called late to Germany. There was only a year until the World Cup, a blip of a lead-up. Already the business security firm Orbit often worked with, Tile, had dug up evidence of meetings between Blair's and Schroeder's people, beyond the public-private partnerships. Germany does not have the problem of an Estonia, she said. Vast demographics couldn't picture Estonia. They couldn't point to it on the map. Germany has an image, and German culture can be globally competitive, yet there is delicacy to it. What is a German brand of soft power? One that travels, invites, rather than a German nationalism. "You're referring to the Anschluss and the Sudetenland," the man said bitterly. "Or emotion." She was a student of the image, the way at a certain angle a nation caught light. She believed in second chances, third, and so on. You pieced together the tropes, then turned them. Yet, she did not yet know how to tell Jeremy that the account would mean a year away. In public opinion polling, what we see is the intellectual history. The art is submerged beneath an identity of engineering and Volkswagen, beer gardens, efficiency. It's ridiculous, of course, but it's an issue of foregrounding. This is the country of Goethe and Einstein, Herzog. "Miss Chen," someone making a show of his watch said, "we know whose country this is." They were untucking their phones from the insides of their jackets, typing, slapping them shut. Someone's whisper cut into her riff. The woman at the head of the table cleared her throat. "I'm sorry, Miss Chen," she said, already standing, "but we'll need to end this meeting. There is a matter at the Foreign Ministry." Alexandra collected her things. She folded the computer and turned off the projector. She'd never persisted with a man, and still, if the Germans offered a contract, she thought she and Jeremy could once a month have weekends together in the aura of Alsatian Riesling, and something like holiday, that perhaps it would defend them from the ordinary rhythm of fracture. She shook the hand of the woman from the Foreign Ministry. "Please," the woman said, extending an arm toward the door, walking her to the exit faster. Alexandra moved into the hallway, and out the window there was a weather that could be described as early. It wasn't rain or shine, just a sense of open time beating down. By the elevator, she looked at her phone. As fast as news, she forgot how to walk. Her legs could only stand in the manner of sprinting. There was a door, registered only after the rush-through. Stairs above and behind and below and ahead. Something cold untied in her stomach. Bombs were exploding across London. Chapter 2. Jeremy could not move, speak. Happenings were happening too fast, and his mind switched from simple sentences. There was no subject, object, predicate, meaning predicated on simple words, one after the other. He was stuck on 4 syllables. Alexandra. Alexandra held hostage. Alexandra beneath a crush of rubble. 4 syllables, with life pulled out from under her. He thought of how he'd never told her he wanted them to die very old. Him first, of course, and holding her hand. He had not even told Alexandra he wanted to choose paper towels with her. Assimilate to the moment. In the offices of Strategic Hedge International, the volume of the television normally tuned to Bloomberg was turned high. Coffers stood erect before the men. It was tragic, the explosion. Explosions, he told them. and the lesson from O1 was it was time to execute the list. They must, he said, offload, sell before the fall. Banks and hotels, British Airways, buy up pharma. It is the responsibility owed their investors. Gavin Thomas's hands already manoeuvred over his desk. Try again. Once. Twice. Fingers clumsy on his mobile. At his ear. This is the sound of not reaching Alexandra. Soon the internet servers failed, and at some point after, it had been confirmed phone lines had gone down. Jeremy heard talking torsos declare normal programming had seeded the breaking news. 1 dead. King's Cross and Russell Square. Old Street. Moorgate. 1 turned to 20. 20 dead. More information is worse news now, someone said. And it was true. Jeremy knew. Jeremy knew breaking news became broken history. New news early in an emergency was a broadcast of provisional facts. Later they'd shed authority, permute, redetermine. Information would redouble. He listened for names. Hers. From the flat screen, the police commissioner announced it wasn't coincidence on the Underground. It was terror. Jeremy did not need to be told. Around the room, the men of Strategic turned to each other. Speculation shaped their lips. Proximity to the U.S. Embassy at Grosvenor and a dense shopping strip meant that another attack could take them too. Or else, maybe that was optimistic. Maybe everywhere meant open to the end. In a city of 8 million people, Thomas was saying, consider stats 20 and 8 million. Fact is, good fraction. Good odds. But Jeremy could not weigh probabilities. He could only think of the impossible. He once had had the other phone, the one his people had given him, not these numbers to nowhere, buttons that wouldn't reach. He could only think of the impossible, though even if he did have the old phone, even if she were alive to call, she'd be on the regular service, the Feld one. Alexandra couldn't answer on the secure line. She, after all, had never been a spy. Chapter 3. In the nights after the underground bombings, they clutched, and they were alive. Fortunately, wonderfully alive. Alexandra told him he was too far when they were next to each other. In the mornings, because she'd admitted what she was too impatient to enjoy, Jeremy removed pomegranate seeds from the husk, and because she did not want him to first think to discard the imperfect thing, she fussed a small screwdriver to repair his watch, though it always was breaking. When they watched a movie, he asked her if the gladiator would live, and no matter the quality, she declared the warrior's future thrive. She began to pay attention to men's shirts in shop windows, cufflinks. They had met in May, and now it was July, and as days ticked off, the calendar grew suggestive. "I've seen you more than the inside of my own refrigerator this week. You know that?" Alexandra said. "A dry goods woman, are you?" "Just north," Alexandra said. "Freezer." "That's the one shaped like a boot." "It's an intemperate country, but you'd be surprised at the idyll," she said. "Food never spoils, and there is no fever, war, or taxation." Her foot was in his hand. "I will levy no impost," he said, "but I cannot speak for the food." That afternoon he noticed that she paper-clipped magazine pages to keep her place. He remarked on it. Later, when she removed an issue from her overnight bag, she found a note clasped where she'd left off reading. "Have a drink with me, or have a museum with me. Have tea." "Am I allowed only one?" she wrote on the blank side of her receipt. And when, after a week, he did not find her small letter, she did not tell him its contents, but she did invite him to meet her best friend. At the bar, over glasses of whiskey and ice furnished with regular fleet, Jeremy removed and layered clothing, muttering too warm, too cold. He reiterated what she told him of Genevieve Bailey in the form of questions. Did Genevieve still prefer for different foods not to touch, and was it true that she preferred to write in pencil? "It is true," Genevieve told him. "I like him," Genevieve told her. Once, Alexandra would have, on the occasion of bringing him flowers, said she was bringing his house flowers. Less to lose, then. Less frightening. Now, she asked, can we be trusted to raise a houseplant? He brought home 2 kittens. The Abyssinian they named Jill, the all-black So-So. The shell-pink felt of the pads on their paws shocked the sequester of her, where careful language stacked, modular, ready-made. They lay on the carpet, jouncing shoelaces, and she made fool noises. Chapter 4. Jeremy was in the habit of walking. Sometimes he would wake up on a weekend and just walk from Islington, passing the Columbia Road flower market with its stalls of tight bouquets clumped by the dozen, get lost in the tessellations of pestles gathered in crystalline cellophane and white paper, continuing all the way down to Canary Wharf. These were not errands. It was only the quiet power of observing the world stayed where you left it, accommodating your passage, homes and trees and automobiles made tractable in a sense. In the panic of too much, you could lose your surroundings. This was legacy wisdom. His mother had never believed in psychotherapy, but she believed in walking. Just walk it off, she said. It had not always worked, the walking cure. It had not worked of late. It was why he was going to Wright's. Because now, Alexandra's very presence incurred a sense of deprivation, what it would be for her to be disappeared. It happened quickly. Someone familiar could do it. Someone decided, and then never again. Never again, when lying in the dark, would they whisper for no reason, other than the way it sanctified information, past sentences. Never again would she say, "Put the geniuses on for bed." The violins would not rise. Cellos would not come in through a song that lived across borders, proseless and mysterious in meaning. Never again would the appearance of her hair, thick as a paintbrush on the pillow, disrupt his vascular system. The day of the bombings, July 7th. 7/7, a day of doubles. Gavin Thomas, the fund researcher, had been unharried. Gavin Thomas, Jeremy supposed, would have known that they would profit marvellously, because it was Gavin Thomas who had advised that they purchase credit default protection against transport just a week before. Gavin Thomas would have known that the value of the CDP would gallop uphill as quickly as trust in the tube shot down, to the detriment of civilized society. Strategic would take in a load. The question was, how he had known the value would swing, how Thomas had predicted catastrophe. Thomas was too connected. Jeremy was sure of it. Charisma was multiplying in secret cells around the globe, men offering ideas to organize lives, men offering ideas to organize deaths. To orchestrate terror was to tell young men what to do with tomorrow, an irresistible charm. You are part of a recipe for disaster. I can give your rage an occupation. He did not know how the system worked or what it meant. He did not know where the sides cut, who Thomas's people were. Yet it was enough to suspect that Thomas had people at all, that someone had known when to bet against the safety of the city. It was enough to thicken the distance. London had grown warmer in recent days. Jeremy could feel the heat on his neck as he walked. He looked at the horizon, something longer than truncated autobiographies, wide blue. He had a way of gentling the air around him, fading into it. Outside Wright's, a 2-floor flat that he kept to only half of, Jeremy made the call. He was not conspicuous on the stoop. The door opened without a word, a slip inside from view. Toward the back of a dark, dusty room, Jeremy sat on the couch by an end table topped with a typewriter. Wright poured a glass of something and nudged it over. He crossed his legs and Jeremy sipped, then waited for the ice to go soundless in the glass again. Cecil, for Wright too. The official stories are insulting. Were they that insulting when it was us keeping them? He said, finally. Everyone has secrets, Jeremy said, especially a country. But the world was more spread out then, Wright said. At the end of when Wright and Jordan were Wilmington and Allsworth, they had flamed out of the Army's intelligence corps the way that either you decided was part of the job or that made you ask for a new name. When he'd first been recruited to Operation Banner, the intelligence corps mission in Northern Ireland, Jeremy had known only the outlines. That the Provisional Irish Republican Army had taken up terror in the name of a united Ireland, and loyalist paramilitary groups like the Ulster Defence Association and the Ulster Volunteer Force responded in kind, and neither the police in the Royal Ulster Constabulary nor the British Army had been able to stop the violence. At the end, he did not know much more. People with access to high grades of classified materials manufactured credentials and rerouted them to other professions. Now, Wright taught courses on the philosophy of the mind and the philosophy of language at King's College London, where probably there were other men who needed aliases. But all the while, into the rest of their lives after Northern Ireland, it was Jeremy and Wright who on occasion met. They found shadows slanted across corners. They whispered, something centripetal leaning them toward each other, spinning, circling on snippets, rumours. Wright's assumption: there were current intel guys tracking him. His former employer would want to make sure secrets stayed, and so together was the only place they allowed the rage to express in their bodies since duty. The world was deadly, and they were pretending to be gentle men. I remember once one Rock telling me about when he was a young handler. Jeremy leaned back in his chair. He was telling me the problem with the route to Mecca. Arab nationalists in Aden. The National Liberation Front blew up a party at the home of a Foreign Office official. It seemed so quaint, so far away and ancient. MI5 wants to distinguish geometry now, Wright said. Self-starting rumours they stopped trailing Khan and Tanweer because the two were merely on the periphery of another operation. When there is no periphery to terror, it promises death anywhere. Jeremy watched Wright pour another drink it, pour another. He could sense the risky nostalgia in the room, in Wright musing that there would have been a trail of transmissions to follow. A to B, B to C, C to D, D for direction. Intercept the signals of the underground attackers, he was saying. Semper Vigiles. Someone had told someone. It's time. Time to make the most private thing a person could ever do, dying, a public event. And MI5 had permitted it to happen. We have to realize what's not ours anymore, said Jeremy. We did what we could. Wright stood. Don't treat me like one of your call center sobbers. If it were over, you wouldn't be here. He crossed his arms. Bastards waited for the G8 summit. Because Blair would be away at Glen Eagles. Because drop panic in the center, Wright continued. Watch the ripples. All the 8 go home unadjourned by terror. Might have been UK news, but now it's worldwide. They've scaled down the globe with perfect timing. At Glen Eagles they were meant to pull terrorist data, Jeremy said. Wright wrung his lips into a tight coil. These bombers have mastered their irony. Mastery. Irony. The drink organized Jeremy's hands in the shape of the glass. Steady. Thomas shouldn't have known, he said. Why credit default right then? Usually it was he counselling Wright against big-picture theories, what the opposition was doing, who was the object of extinction. Wright collected news clippings. He was certain the story wasn't the story when it was official. He did not know the ops, but he knew there were leaks. Wright obsessed over who had the circulated dossiers when they were handlers. Over splinter groups, over elections. Jeremy would say you could go crazy worrying about strangers in Belfast, Sudan, the Balkans. There were too many people you didn't know. So you recognized your finitude. You did not clarify the codes. You went on eating breakfast, popping sleeping pills. You could suffer more for the remote suffering, or you could realize your business wasn't the public good anymore. It was one day, yours at a time. He would say those things before Alexandra. Thomas, he's part of a trend. They believe all those AAA CDOs can collect interest free of loss, that the CDP will earn out eventually. Simple as go bullish, go bearish, go to the country home. I know how it works, Jeremy said. I'm the one hedging. And yet, during the anthrax panic, Strategic had manoeuvred the long and short game on Bayer and a handful of generic drug companies. Though the patent had expired in nearly every country, Bayer still held the patent for Cipro, a drug used to treat anthrax in America. In the midst of an ally emergency, Strategic made an inconceivable dump of capital. "I'm quitting, and just say you're right," Wright said. "I am right. Just say you are. What is the use of the walkaway?" "The away," Jeremy said. "It is a good quality to be in the circumstances. Can't get away from what's inside you." "What's inside?" "The listening, the half-breath. But for now, the strategy. Continue the image, especially to her. Continue the regular fictions of the person he was supposed to be. He was supposed to be someone nonchalant in love and lies, someone who quipped and would never tell Alexandra he preferred her to food and water. 3 weeks earlier, I'd have said nothing, but it wasn't 3 weeks earlier. It was right before the bombs," Jeremy said. An angle of the chin, a tunneling with the eyes. It was not pity exactly, Jeremy knew, but the look dropped down a shaft of silence between them, a punctuation mark in the face. Wright recrossed his arms, a reversal of right and left. He worked his tongue over his upper teeth, and finally he spoke. "Ring the prepaid if you want to talk," Wright said. Then he stood up and walked, and Jeremy followed. The lines of the hallway seemed almost to choreograph his exit. They did not shake hands. It was simpler, the gesture. Not even a sigh, and Wright opened the door out into the London fog, for Jeremy to fade back to the theatre of his new life. Chapter 5. Alexandra wanted to be wry and knowing, like the women in New York who somehow had it all, calm and casual in their thin cashmere sweaters, buttering bread for their children at brunch on the weekend, and stepping crisply to hail a cab from work at 5, and all of it, their happiness, ignored like a given. There was an unfeathered romance to these women. How normalized the abundant life was to them. But it was abashing a little, the big weather of feeling for him. At night, Jeremy Jordan astonished her body. His much stronger than the drawn face and lean legs would suggest. A thin man, but sprawling, with all that warmth rising off him. He was capable of reminding her how wide his shoulders were as they blotted out the cool cast of the moon in the window. The rage of his rising and falling matched her own. They knew each other then as they couldn't in words. In his apartment in Islington, they lay looking at each other, side by side, with the tips of their fingers just touching one side of a breath, pulling apart on the other, a sort of stretching come from their lungs. The voice of someone famous reached from another room, a newsperson. "But you love your job," Alexandra said. "You obsess over it." "I am preoccupied by it," he said. "I think the word for it is occupied," she said. "You are occupied. That's what an occupation does." "I want to do something valuable," he said, "instead of lucrative." "You could do both," she teased. "Be a regular George Soros." "And break the Bank of England." A humble man would allow that perhaps in his hypothetical second career he would only cause the market to tank occasionally. But you must be the architect of national economic crisis. "In my hypothetical second career, I will not settle for less than disaster," he said. "I will know my worth." She could see he did not want to think for a while. He moved his hands into her hair, and then her shirt, pants. She spread out on the bed. When he collected the bone of her pelvis in his hands, she closed her eyes, and there was depth in the darkness. "Look at me," he said, and she watched his eyes grow closer to something like alarm. What it is. Tiny tilts, shifts, but the object's views fell off, and then she heard something her own, plaintive and undemanding, an unresigned sigh, and there was no qualifications between them. Or else there was only one irking detail, one marring absence, but that could change, she believed. Change, after all, was what she had done with her.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?